Are those things even real? The question, laced with a sneering amusement, echoed in the cavernous wood-paneled courtroom. It came from the elevated bench, from Judge Thompson, a man whose tailored robe seemed to add more to his arrogance than his authority. He leaned forward, his chin resting on his steepled fingers, a smug smile playing on his lips. Below him, standing alone at the defendant's podium, was Marvin Bowen. At 84 years old, his frame was slight, softened by the years, but his back was ramrod straight. He wore a simple light gray suit that was immaculately clean, but had seen better decades. Pinned to his left breast was a short, colorful rack of ribbons and two heavy ornate medals that caught the dim courtroom light. He didn't flinch, he didn't reply. His hands, gnarled with age and scarred with stories, remained clasped loosely in front of him. His gaze was fixed on the state seal on the wall behind the judge, his pale blue eyes calm and distant. "I asked you a question, Mr. Bowen," Judge Thompson said, his voice rising, enjoying the attention of the half-empty room. "This is a courtroom, not a costume party. Are those medals authentic, or did you pick them up at a surplus store for the occasion?" A few sycophantic chuckles rippled from the prosecutor's table. Marvin's court-appointed public defender, a young woman named Sarah Jenkins, shot to her feet. "Your Honor, the decorations of my client have no bearing on a simple traffic citation." The judge waved a dismissive hand, his smile widening. He had found his entertainment for the morning. "On the contrary, counsel, it speaks to character. Contempt of court can take many forms, including presenting oneself in a fraudulent manner." He beckoned with a finger. "Approach the bench, Mr. Bowen. Let me have a look." Marvin moved with a slow, deliberate economy of motion. There was no defiance in his steps, only a quiet compliance that seemed to agitate the judge even more. He stopped before the bench, and the bailiff, a burly man who had the decency to look uncomfortable, gestured for the medals. Marvin carefully unpinned the entire bar from his lapel and handed it over. The bailiff passed it up to the judge. Judge Thompson held the decorations in his palm as if weighing a piece of cheap fruit. He ran a thumb over the polished metal, his expression one of theatrical disbelief. "A Navy Cross, really, and a Purple Heart with, what is this? 2 gold stars. My, you were quite the hero, weren't you?" Sarah Jenkins spoke up again, her voice tight with frustration. "Your Honor, we are here because Mr. Bowen stopped his vehicle for 30 seconds in a no-standing zone on Memorial Day. He was trying to pay his respects at the Waterfront War Memorial. 30 seconds or 30 minutes. The law is the law, counsel," the judge snapped, his eyes never leaving Marvin. He dangled the medals from his fingers. "And the Stolen Valor Act is also the law. I see men like this all the time. Old-timers looking for a little attention, a little unearned respect. They think a chest full of tin can get them out of a parking ticket." Marvin remained silent. His calm was a fortress, and the judge's words were arrows shattering against its walls. The air in the courtroom grew thick with a palpable sense of injustice. The handful of people in the gallery were no longer bored or sleepy. They were watching intently, leaning forward in their seats. They were witnessing not a legal proceeding but a public humiliation. The judge continued his monologue, relishing the power. "You know, the men who truly earned these, they don't parade them around for traffic court. They have a quiet dignity, something you, sir, seem to be lacking." He tapped the Navy Cross with his fingernail, a sharp clicking sound that made Sarah wince. "This one in particular is a high honor, reserved for acts of extraordinary heroism." "What extraordinary act did you perform, Mr. Bowen? Misjudging a parking sign?" Marvin's gaze finally lowered from the state seal and met the judge's. His voice, when it came, was soft but clear, carrying the quiet rasp of age. "I wear them to remember the men I served with." "Oh, you served, did you?" The judge scoffed. "Where? The mess hall?" "On the USS Forrestal, Your Honor," Marvin said, his tone even. The judge's laughter was a short, ugly bark. "A ship? How very dramatic. Counsel, I am going to order a brief recess. I want my clerk to run this man's name and see if there is any record of this illustrious service. And I'm warning you, Mr. Bowen," he said, leaning over the bench and pointing the medals at him like an accusation. "If I find you are lying to this court, your traffic citation will be the very least of your worries. I will hold you in contempt and recommend federal charges for this pathetic display." He slammed his gavel down, the sound cracking like a whip through the tense silence. "Recess. Bailiff, escort Mr. Bowen to the witness room. And hold on to these," he said, dropping the medals onto his desk as if they were trash. The judge's thumb had been rubbing over the intricate face of the Navy Cross as he spoke. For a fleeting moment, as the cold metal pressed into his skin, the sterile wood-paneled courtroom seemed to dissolve. The world was no longer quiet. It was a screaming symphony of chaos. The air, thick with the acrid smell of jet fuel and burning metal, was filled with the deafening roar of fire. The solid steel deck of the aircraft carrier pitched and groaned like a dying beast. Flames, hundreds of feet high, clawed at the sky, consuming everything in their path. A younger Marvin Bowen, his face smeared with soot and sweat, was half carrying, half dragging a fellow sailor whose flight suit was soaked in blood. The heat was unbearable, blistering the skin, and with every step the deck threatened to give way. All around them men were shouting, screaming, fighting for their lives against an inferno that had turned their ship into a floating hell. He pushed the wounded man toward a group of firefighters before turning back, his eyes scanning the wall of fire for the next soul to pull from the blaze. The weight of responsibility was heavier than any man he could ever carry. The image vanished as quickly as it came, leaving only the sterile silence of the courtroom and the judge's dismissive sneer. Sarah Jenkins hurried her client into the small, windowless witness room adjacent to the courtroom. The moment the door clicked shut, her professional composure crumbled. "Mr. Bowen, I am so sorry. That was unconscionable. I've never seen a judge behave that way." Marvin simply nodded and sat down in one of the hard plastic chairs, his hands resting on his knees. He looked tired, the fire of the courtroom confrontation having drained something from him, leaving behind a profound weariness. "It's all right, son," he said, though Sarah was a woman. "He's a man who has only ever read the rules. He's never understood the cost." Sarah paced the small room, her mind racing. The judge wasn't just biased, he was on a crusade. He was going to make an example of Marvin. She felt a surge of helpless anger. She was a young public defender, barely 2 years out of law school, with no influence and no power. Thompson would walk all over her and her client. "There has to be something I can do," she muttered, rifling through the thin manila folder that held Marvin Bowen's entire case file. The traffic ticket, a copy of his driver's license, her own scribbled notes. It was hopeless. Then she saw it. On the initial intake form, under the section for emergency contacts, she had written down a name and number Marvin had given her. She had almost dismissed it at the time. The old man had been a little vague, saying, "Only call if it's a real storm and you can't find your way." Sarah had assumed it was a relative, maybe a son. The name was Bill Hayes, followed by a number with a Washington, D.C. area code. A real storm. This felt like a real storm. On a desperate whim, she pulled out her cell phone. "Mr. Bowen, you gave me a name when we first met. Bill Hayes. You said to call him in an emergency. Would you consider this an emergency?" Marvin looked up, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. For the first time, he seemed hesitant. "He's a busy man. I wouldn't want to bother him. With all due respect, sir, you're facing contempt charges and a judge who thinks you're a criminal," Sarah said, her thumb hovering over the call button. "I think it's time we bothered somebody." She pressed the button. The phone rang 3 times, then a crisp, professional voice answered. "Admiral Hayes's office." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "Admiral. Yes, hello. My name is Sarah Jenkins. I'm a public defender in the city courthouse. I'm calling on behalf of a client, Mr. Marvin Bowen. The Admiral's schedule is full for the next several weeks. If you'd like to submit a request in writing, I can give you an address," the aide said, his tone bored and dismissive. He was a human wall. "No, you don't understand," Sarah insisted, her voice rising with urgency. "It's an emergency. My client is—" She could hear the aide about to cut her off. In a moment of panic, she said the one thing she could think of. "He's in a courtroom, and the judge just took his medals. He took his Navy Cross." There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. The wall had just been vaporized. The aide's voice, when it returned, was completely different. It was sharp, cold, and utterly focused. "Ma'am, what is the name of your client again?" "Bowen. Marvin Bowen." "And your location?" "City Courthouse, 3rd Street, courtroom 4B. Stay right where you are. Do not let Mr. Bowen leave that room. The Admiral is on his way." The line went dead. Sarah stared at her phone, her heart pounding. What had she just done? Inside a stately office at the Pentagon, a young Navy lieutenant commander slammed a phone down, his face pale. He strode past flags and plaques and burst into the inner office without knocking. Admiral Bill Hayes, a man in his late 70s with a face like a sea chart and the sharp, intelligent eyes of a lifelong commander, looked up from a thick intelligence briefing. He didn't appreciate being interrupted. "What is it, Commander?" "Sir, I just received a call from a public defender at the city courthouse. She's with a man who's been brought in on a minor charge. The judge is accusing him of stolen valor." The Admiral sighed, annoyed. "And this requires you to burst into my office. Why?" "There's a protocol for these things." "Sir," the commander said, his voice tense. "The man's name is Marvin Bowen." The briefing papers in Admiral Hayes's hands went utterly still. He slowly lowered them to his desk. The name hung in the air, instantly changing the entire atmosphere of the room. It was a name spoken with a quiet reverence in the senior ranks of the Navy, a name that was synonymous with a certain kind of legend. Marvin Bowen? The Admiral repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. Our Marvin Bowen? Yes, sir. The judge has him in a holding room. A dark flush rose up Admiral Hayes's neck. He stood up, his chair scraping back harshly. The annoyance was gone, replaced by a cold, controlled fury that was far more terrifying than any shouting. Get my car, now, and get me an honor detail. Dress blues. I want them at the courthouse 10 minutes ago. He grabbed his formal cover from its stand. The absolute fool, he muttered, his voice a low growl. He has no idea who he's dealing with. Back in courtroom 4B, Judge Thompson swept back onto the bench, a look of vindicated triumph on his face. He held a single sheet of paper in his hand. Bailiff, bring the defendant back in here. Marvin and Sarah re-entered the courtroom and took their places. The judge let the silence stretch out, savoring the moment. Well, Mr. Bowen, he began, his voice dripping with condescension, I have had my clerk run your name through every public military service database available, and surprise, surprise, there is no record of a Marvin Bowen ever being awarded a Navy Cross, or a Purple Heart for that matter. Just a standard enlistment and an honorable discharge. It seems my initial assessment was correct. He leaned forward, his face a mask of smug righteousness. You are a fraud, sir, and I will not have frauds in my courtroom. I am finding you guilty on the traffic citation, and furthermore I am holding you in contempt of this court. I am sentencing you to 48 hours in the county jail to reflect on your lies. Perhaps that will teach you that honor is something you earn, not something you pin to your chest. He raised his gavel to make it official, the ultimate act of his petty tyranny. This was his moment of victory. He was putting this quiet, defiant old man in his place. Just as the gavel began its descent, the grand double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a loud bang that startled everyone. The first thing anyone noticed was the sound, a rhythmic, unified clicking of hard-soled, polished shoes on the marble floor. It was a sound of purpose, of absolute precision. Then came the sight. 4 uniformed sailors in their immaculate dress blues marched into the courtroom. They moved as one, their faces set and serious, their white hats a stark contrast to their dark uniforms. They split into pairs, taking up positions on either side of the doors, their posture rigid, their hands clasped behind their backs. They were a silent, intimidating testament to order and discipline. Behind them, a tall, older man in the decorated uniform of a 4-star admiral strode into the room. His presence was overwhelming. The gold on his uniform seemed to soak up the light, and the rows of ribbons on his chest told a story of a lifetime of service at the highest levels. He ignored the sputtering judge completely. His sharp, steely eyes scanned the room for a moment before they locked onto Marvin Bowen. Judge Thompson, his face a mixture of confusion and outrage, found his voice. What is the meaning of this? I am in session. You can't just— His words died in his throat. The Admiral had begun to walk down the central aisle, his steps measured and powerful. He didn't look at the judge. He didn't look at the stunned gallery. His entire focus, his entire being was directed at the frail old man standing before the bench. He stopped precisely 3 paces from Marvin. In the ringing silence of the courtroom, Admiral Bill Hayes brought his hand up in a salute. It was not a casual gesture. It was a movement of razor-sharp precision, his hand striking the brim of his cover with an audible snap. It was a salute of profound, unequivocal respect. Master Chief Bowen, the Admiral's voice boomed, a commander's voice that needed no microphone. It was a voice accustomed to being obeyed on the decks of warships and in the halls of power. It is an honor to see you, sir. Marvin, for the first time that day, seemed to stand even taller. A faint, sad smile touched his lips. He gave a slight, respectful nod. Hello, Bill. The Admiral held his salute for a long moment before dropping it. He then turned his gaze, now as cold and hard as frozen steel, upon Judge Thompson. The judge visibly shrank back in his chair. Your Honor, the Admiral began, his voice dripping with icy formality. You seem to be under a grave misapprehension. He walked toward the bench, took the medals from the judge's desk, and held them with a reverence that was a stunning rebuke in itself. You hold in your hand the service record of a man this Navy considers a living legend. He turned to address the entire courtroom. Master Chief Petty Officer Marvin Bowen served 30 years in the United States Navy. He fought in Korea. He served 3 tours in Vietnam. His public records are sealed under a Level 4 security classification, which is why your clerk couldn't find them in a public search. They are sealed because Master Chief Bowen also served as one of the pioneers of our special warfare community. A collective gasp went through the gallery. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. The Admiral wasn't finished. He held up the medals. "This Purple Heart," he said, his voice resonating with history, "is for shrapnel he took outside Da Nang. The 2 gold stars are for being wounded twice more, once during a riverine ambush and once during the fire on the USS Forrestal." He then held up the other medal, the one the judge had mocked so cruelly. "And this is the Navy Cross. It was awarded for extraordinary heroism during that same fire. On July 29, 1967, when a rocket accidentally detonated on the Forrestal's flight deck, Master Chief Bowen, then a first-class petty officer, repeatedly charged into the heart of the inferno. He braved exploding ordnance and pools of burning jet fuel to pull his wounded shipmates from the wreckage. He is credited with personally saving the lives of 17 sailors before he collapsed from smoke inhalation and severe burns covering 60% of his body. The Admiral took a step closer to the bench, his voice dropping to a low, furious growl. "This man is not a fraud. This man is a hero of the highest caliber, and your treatment of him today is a stain upon the honor of this court and the nation he so bravely served." The judge's face had gone from smug to confused to chalk white. He looked at Marvin, then at the Admiral, then at the medals in the Admiral's hand as if seeing them for the first time. He was speechless. Admiral Hayes turned back to Marvin. "Master Chief, on behalf of the United States Navy, I apologize for the disrespect you have been shown today." Marvin simply placed a gentle, gnarled hand on the Admiral's uniformed arm. The gesture was both a comfort and a command, and the Admiral's rigid posture softened slightly. "It's all right, Bill," Marvin said, his voice back to its quiet calm. "He's a man of books. He couldn't have known." Marvin then looked at the judge, not with anger or triumph, but with a surprising gentleness. "Your Honor," he said softly, "these pieces of metal aren't for me. I don't wear them to get out of tickets or to ask for respect. I wear them so that I don't forget. I wear them for the boys who didn't come home, for the faces I see every time I close my eyes. They are the ones who paid the price. I'm just the one who has to carry the memory." His words settled over the courtroom, a quiet benediction that was more powerful than any legal verdict. He wasn't just defending himself. He was speaking for a whole generation of men who carried the unseen weight of their service every single day. As Marvin spoke of the boys who didn't come home, the image of the medals in the Admiral's hand seemed to blur just for a second. The scene shifted. A hospital ward, smelling of antiseptic and pain. A much younger Marvin Bowen lay in a bed, his arms and torso swathed in thick white bandages. He could barely move. A grim-faced captain, his own uniform smelling faintly of smoke, stood by his bed. He held a small, velvet-lined box. "You wear this for them, son," the captain had said, his voice thick with emotion as he pinned the Navy Cross to Marvin's hospital gown. "You made it out. You carry it for all of them." Judge Thompson, utterly broken, could only stammer. Case dismissed. "My deepest apologies, Mr. Bowen." He banged the gavel weakly, a pathetic thud that signaled the end of his authority. The Admiral and the honor guard escorted Marvin from the courtroom. As they walked down the aisle, every single person in the gallery, from the bored-looking reporter to the other defendants waiting for their turn, rose to their feet. They didn't clap or cheer. They stood in a profound, respectful silence, a spontaneous honor guard of ordinary citizens for an extraordinary man. The fallout was immediate. The story was picked up by the local news, then national outlets. An official inquiry was launched by the state's Judicial Review Board into Judge Thompson's conduct. Within a month, he was formally censured and quietly retired from the bench, his career ending in disgrace. The incident prompted a new statewide mandate for sensitivity and awareness training for all court personnel on how to properly interact with veterans, ensuring a humiliation like Marvin's would not happen again. Several weeks later, Marvin Bowen was sitting in his usual spot at a small corner coffee shop, reading the morning paper. The bell over the door chimed, and a man walked in, looking hesitant. It was the former Judge Thompson, now dressed in a simple suit, the arrogance stripped from him, leaving behind a man who looked tired and diminished. He spotted Marvin and walked over to his table. "Mr. Bowen," he said, his voice quiet, I just wanted to apologize again, in person, without the robes or the bench. What I did was inexcusable. I was arrogant and cruel, and I am truly sorry." Marvin looked up from his paper, his blue eyes holding no trace of malice. He simply gestured to the empty chair across from him. "It's forgotten," he said. "Sit down, son. Have a cup of coffee." Thompson, stunned by the simple act of grace, slowly sat down. For the next hour, he listened as Marvin Bowen, the unassuming hero, finally told him about the men he wore the medals for. The story of Marvin Bowen is a powerful reminder that heroes don't always announce themselves. True valor is often quiet, wrapped in humility and the simple dignity of a life well lived. If you were moved by his story of quiet valor, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Veteran Valor for more stories of unassuming heroes.